Again, welcome back to those people that are live streaming. We found out that we have about 35 different people on, or different computers on the live streaming, even from California and Wyoming, I believe, in different states. So that's fantastic. But again, welcome to you guys. And this afternoon, we have it's kind of a panel discussion, but they're each going to share their own story. And these are individuals that came down from Minnesota. Minnesota has had their own laws now regarding sex offenders since about 2007. Our first speaker this afternoon on the panel will be Michelle Chalin. She has a Bachelor's of Arts degree and a Master's of Science degree with majors in gerontology and psychology. She has 13 years of administrator's experience in various long-term care settings ranging from assisted living to an 86-bed facility with a memory care unit. Kind of sounds like home. Michelle has been the Forensic Nursing Home Administrator and Residential Program Services Director for St. Peter Regional Treatment Center since March of 2008, when the state opened their forensic nursing home for 16 residents. In December of 2010, the program was moved into a new 48-bed facility. We have Maria Runyon also this afternoon. She's the Executive Director for the At-Home Living Facilities in Duluth, Minnesota. At-Home Living is a private for-profit organization primarily serving people with brain injury and mental illness since its inception in 2000. They have a 15 4-bed adult foster care program, one 10-bed board and lodge, one 38-bed assisted living, and an independent living skills program where they serve people living in their own apartments. She graduated from the University of North Dakota with a Bachelor of Science in Recreation and Leisure Services with an emphasis in therapeutic recreation and a minor in psychology. She held the National Council for Therapeutic Recreation certification for 10 years. Maria has worked in multiple settings such as Genesis Medical Center in Davenport, Mount Olivet Nursing Home in Minneapolis, and finally in the community-based model of her current employer. She's been working with people with disabilities for over 20 years and holds strong values when it comes to quality supports and respect for all individuals, regardless of what their histories may report. Jen Anderson will be our third presenter this afternoon, and she's the Director of Services for At-Home Living Facility. She attended Wisconsin Indian Head Technical College, University of Wisconsin Superior, and the College of St. Scholastica for Business Management and Marketing with a healthcare concentration. She's completed a variety of certificates in chemical dependency, rehab, reentry, community integration. Despite growing up in a family with varying disabilities, like many, Jen did not find her true occupational desire until later in life when she discovered her passion to work with individuals with developmental disabilities and help promote independence in restrictive settings as possible. She currently provides crisis prevention and behavior management modification training, person-centered planning, and risk management for clientele within At-Home Living. She serves on the Lake County Mental Health Advisory Committee and the Lakes Area Foster Care Provider Group, which consists of participants from area's local providers to network and discuss legislative changes in the impact to better serve the individuals they support. Iowa currently doesn't have laws on the book as far as how it affects us as providers, so we're hoping to learn the good things and some of the challenges that the individuals from Minnesota took on. So with that, I'm turning it over to you guys. Thank you.
Thank you for having me today. I'm Michelle Chalin, Administrator for the Forensic Nursing Home, which is located in St. Peter, Minnesota. I'll give you a little bit of history. The state of Minnesota had an issue a while back that they were unable to find sufficient community placement for residents with challenging behaviors and histories, criminal histories in particular, and in need of nursing home level of care. So in 1962, the state took over the operation of what was called the Agua Ching Nursing Home, or it was actually called the Agua Ching Sanatorium at that time. and converted that into a state-owned facility for residents with challenging behaviors. Agua Ching was located in a northern rural community of Walker, Minnesota. It had 22 buildings with multiple floors, so it was quite an expansive operation. 175 acres. It was located on Leech Lake, which was really some prime real estate at the time. And it was a 343-bed licensed nursing home, and it accepted those residents with challenging behaviors and criminal history. Some of the issues that came about with Agua Ching was it had an aging physical plant, and it was very expensive to maintain. Again, it was prime property for developers, so there was a lot of interest in purchasing that property. And then there were also increasing concerns from the community regarding sex offenders and others with criminal history living in a community facility. So in 2005, there was some legislation put in place that resulted in the creation of the forensic nursing home. The forensic nursing home is located, at this time this was just a legislation, a facility didn't open until 2008, but through the legislation it was determined that they wanted a nursing home located on the St. Peter Regional Treatment Center campus to serve patients that had been committed MIND, that would be mentally ill and dangerous, SDP, sexually dangerous person, or SPP, sexually psychopathic personality, that have become medically fragile and in need of nursing home care. We also have a mission to ensure the public safety, and we also accept residents that are under a commitment or a sentence with the Department of Corrections. They can come to our facility on a supervised medical release status. So again, the population served would be residents that are mentally ill and dangerous, sex offenders, as well as prisoners under conditional medical release. We serve both male and female residents at the forensic nursing home. They have to be 18 years or older. Some nursing homes in a community might have more strict stipulations, such as the age 65 and older. But in our case, because we are serving such a specific population and they have such differing histories, we had to expand that criteria. And we have had residents in their 30s all the way up until their late 80s. Priority placement is given for those residents who require assistance with activities of daily living, which is typical for nursing homes. That would be residents who need assistance with dressing, grooming, feeding, bathing, toileting, and other hands-on activities. So Agua Ching was closed in March of 2008, and that's when we opened the forensic nursing home. There were 16 residents that Agua Ching could not find community placement for, and those were the initial 16 residents that we started with at the forensic nursing home. There were varying reasons why those 16 residents could not be placed in the community. Part of it had to do with just their histories while at Agua Ching, and there were some providers that were not willing to take a risk. We had, several residents that were committed as mentally ill and dangerous who had a history of fire setting, even when in other community facilities. So that was not a risk that some providers decided to take. And we also had residents with sex offense histories. And so in Minnesota, one of the things that had to be done, we had a group home that was willing to take 4 of the 16 residents that had been at Agua Ching. Those 4 residents had a sex offense history, and with the new laws that have been enacted in Minnesota, there had to be a community notification meeting. And at that community notification meeting, it's, the information went out to all the community providers and everyone in the community that a group home was going to be set up for these particular residents, and you could come and learn more about them. Well, as was mentioned this morning, the Drew Shadeen case had been very recent in Minnesota history then. So when we went to the public notification meeting and mentioned the sex offenders that would be moving into this group home, there was quite an uproar. And so even though the home had been purchased and modifications were being done to service these residents, the public outcry was so great that we had to backtrack, and they ended up in the forensic nursing home. We started construction on a new facility in St. Peter in March of 2008 when we started that temporary unit, and we actually moved into that building in December of 2010. We've already talked about forensic. It's a state-owned and operated facility. We're part of the state-operated services forensic programs, and we're located on the 210-acre campus of the St. Peter Regional Treatment Center. This is the layout of our campus. The nursing home, it's not marked very well, but the northeast corner, there's that little cross-like building. That's the nursing home. And so we're on a very large campus. The lower campus houses part of our sex offender program and also some of our other forensic services for residents that are mentally ill and dangerous. And the upper campus has the Minnesota Security Hospital and the nursing home. The building features, we have a 48-bed building. We have 4 private rooms with private baths. The other 22 rooms are shared by 2 people, and they also share a bathroom. We have separate tub and shower facilities, a day room and television room on each of the 3 wings, and it was built to nursing home specifications. And I'll mention that if anyone is considering building a forensic type nursing home or a facility for residents with these particular histories, it's really important to have the right people at the table. I was hired in January of 2008 to run a nursing home, and we were opening in March. And so by then, the new building plans had already been approved by everyone. And so on day 1 of my employment, the plans for the new building were shared with me. And I looked at it and I could not believe some of the security features that were in place. There was no way that we would be able to license that building as a nursing home with some of the features that were done in those pre-plans. So we had to go back and redo some things. So certainly involve your state health department engineers, and also, if you can, the staff that are going to be involved in the operation of the facility. That was a big mistake, I think, on Minnesota's part, and we had to go back, and it delayed the project by actually a couple of years to actually make the changes that needed to be done. You can't build a nursing home to correction specifications if you expect to receive a nursing home license. So be sure and consider that as you're moving forward. Here's the floor plan of our building. Off to the east there is the main entrance to the facility. And in entering the building, you go into a large entryway. We have administration there, as well as bathrooms and a conference room and the staff lounge. Then you actually go through a sally port. A sally port, for those of you who don't know, is it's a corridor that has 2 locked doors on either end. And both doors cannot be opened at the same time. It's a security feature. So you go through a sally port and then onto our unit. There are 3 wings on the unit. Nothing unique about the wings. We don't have it set up where one wing is for residents with dementia and one wing is for independent residents. It's not set up where people with the sex offense histories are in one area and mentally ill and dangerous are in a different area. Everyone's mixed. This is the front entrance to the building. As I mentioned, we're on the St. Peter Regional Treatment Center campus. To get onto our campus, it's considered a secured campus. So before anyone can actually even get onto the campus, they go through an access gate and are processed there. You get your license is taken, you're asked where you're going, and then actually to get into the building is completely locked. We meet all visitors at the entrance or other people that are coming to the facility to do business and process them before they actually go into the building. We don't allow any visits or other people onto our living unit. When we have people that are interested in a nursing home and want to see what it looks like, we've taken pictures and we do a virtual tour. It's very important to us to maintain the privacy of our residents, but also having visitors come through can be very disruptive. It can be a nice opportunity for particular residents to draw attention to, or just to seek attention, I should say. So you want to be cautious with that. Also, because some of our residents have sex offense histories, we do not allow visits from children. And I think as you've already learned this morning, not everyone with a sex offense history, that history is tied to children, but it is a very vulnerable group, and we try not to present opportunities for our residents to involve in more criminal activity. This is an example of one of the day rooms. It's just a television room. We have a TV there and some chairs as a community space. This is a resident bedroom. We provide all the furniture for our residents. They're not allowed to bring in any personal furniture. They come, of course, with clothing and pictures and things like that. But once again, depending upon their care plan and what their offenses were, there are certain things that are not allowed. One thing we do is we go through all of the mail and packages that are going to our residents to check for contraband. One of our contraband items could be catalogs. We have to go through a catalog, and if there's pictures of children, even if the children are fully clothed, it doesn't have to be sexually explicit as any of us would define it, but any children or cards or anything that has photos of children are not allowed in our facility. This is one of the hallways, and for this I just wanted to point out that it's important to have really good space. You don't necessarily want residents to have physical contact with each other as they're walking through the hallways. So try to have as much space as possible. This is our dining room. It's a pretty typical dining room for a nursing home. We do, again, speaking to the space issue, it is important to have sufficient space so that the residents can spread out. Unlike a community nursing home where a lot of the residents know each other just by virtue of being in the community, or their daughters or kids work together and they have that history, our residents are not there by choice. They're committed to our facility or committed to the state of Minnesota, and so they often don't care for each other. We've had offenders that were from Department of Corrections, and as soon as this new resident walked in the door, there was a history with that resident from Department of Corrections, and right away they refused to sit at the table with that resident or live on the wing where that resident was. So you have to have space to be able to accommodate for those needs. And it's not necessarily accommodating for that resident preference, but as a speaker spoke to this morning, you really need to try to minimize any adverse events that can occur in the facility. So it's more for the protection of other residents and your staff. We have 2 fenced courtyards at the facility, and they're secured courtyards. Again, we have, I think it's about a 15-foot fence around the facility, and that was even something that had to be considered when building the facility. There was some discussion as to whether we should have a razor wire fence or if there shouldn't be a fence at all because, you know, you have the potential for seeing through the fence. So we ended up going with a mesh fencing material that you can barely get your fingers in. So there's no way you could climb up there. The services we offer at the nursing home, we have long-term care, which includes dementia care. We also do short-term rehab care. And for short-term rehab, we have therapy staff in the building. And once the resident is back to their base functioning, we will send them back to the facility from whence they came. So if they've came to us from the Minnesota Sex Offender Program, once we've done that physical rehab with them, they go back to the Sex Offender Program. And the same with Department of Corrections. And we also offer end-of-life care. And certainly, you know, most of the residents that have come to the forensic nursing home, they do end up passing away there. Whether they've come for long-term care, it's just that we haven't been able to rehab them properly, or we haven't been able to find a community partner that can meet their needs. We're licensed as a nursing home under the state of Minnesota guidelines. We're not federally certified, and we are not Joint Commission. Staffing, we staff just like a typical community nursing home with a little extra. So in terms of nursing, we have RNs, LPNs, and CNAs. It's a primary nursing model. We use an acuity tool which addresses both the physical and mental health status of our residents. We have a staffing minimum. Again, it's based upon acuity, but right now, with the population that we run about 3.5 residents to every 1 staff. We have additional staff in the facility if we have to take residents on appointments outside of the building. And on occasion, we have had to do one-to-one supervision of residents, typically based upon their mental health status. And so we have additional staff for that. So we've established a minimum, and that minimum staff is to remain on the unit. Any appointments or if we have visitors, that requires additional staff for us. We also have recreational therapists that work with our residents, also activity staff. We have social workers, dietitian, of course, and dietary staff, physical, occupational, and speech therapy. And then as part of our campus, we employ psychologists that can do a lot of the risk assessments that was referenced this morning. We also have psychiatrists to deal with mental health issues and medical doctors. And those are all a part of our staff at the facility. So staff training, our staff receive 3 weeks of orientation, 40 hours a week, before they even go on to the unit. And that orientation includes training in mental health issues, personal safety techniques. That would be physically intervening with residents. There's always the potential there, and we've had to intervene physically with our residents before. So we train staff extensively in that. We also do therapeutic intervention, which is trying to de-escalate an event before it results in a physical altercation. We do a lot of talk about boundaries, especially when you're working with a sex offender group or residents with a psychopathic personality or antisocial behavior. Boundaries are really important. A lot of times, staff don't even realize when they're being groomed. So it's important to have that awareness before they get onto the unit. And we also have a patient panel that talks about treatment and how treatment has worked for them and different ways that they handle day-to-day functions on the unit. And then, of course, we have some annual training requirements, which includes that personal safety techniques and therapeutic intervention, as well as the CPR and things like that are more standard in the nursing home. Our funding, we are 100% state allocated. So we're part of the state Minnesota budget. There are no other sources of funding available to us. We considered federal certification in order to get some of those federal dollars back into the state, but that was denied because of the population that we served. Under the CMS guidelines, we're actually considered more of an institute for mental disease because most of our residents have a mental health diagnosis or, and they're committed to our facility. They're not there by choice. So we tried to receive federal funding, but it was denied very quickly. And it wasn't that our residents didn't meet the nursing home level of care. It had to do with the histories. I'm sorry, does anyone have any questions? I feel like I'm going on and on, so.
What is your population right now, your residential population?
Right now, we have 34 beds of the 48 open. What Minnesota did, we did some projections several years ago, and it was determined at that time that there might be as much of a need for 150 nursing home beds, not necessarily within the forensic system, but for these residents with these histories. The forensic nursing home, as I mentioned, opened in 2010, the new building, and we initially had 16 residents. Now we're up to 34. And part of the issue is we expect the numbers to continue to grow.
34 open?
We have 34 residents.
Oh, okay, okay.
Yep. Part of the issue, too, is the building itself. Because most of the rooms were built as shared rooms, we have certain residents that cannot have roommates. It's too great of a risk. So even though by license, we're licensed for 48 beds, it's not likely that we'll ever be able to have 48 residents in that building. So with 34 right now, we have one open bed.
And what's your budget to run the facility?
Well, as I mentioned, we're state allocated, and so our daily rate, resident daily rate, is between $500 and $600 a day. Yes, it's very expensive. And part of that, because we're in a state system, when we started the facility, even, the majority of your costs will be in staff wages. And so all of our staff are part of a labor union, and so we had to fit them into the particular grid and the slot. So a community nursing home, and I was the administrator of a community nursing home before I took this position, also in St. Peter. Our wage for a CNA ran between $8 an hour to start and probably maxed out at about $12. Here at the forensic nursing home, our wage for a new nursing assistant without any experience starts out at $15.50, and we top out at $21 an hour. And then the benefits, and then the benefits are just incredible. And I don't believe that staff at the forensic nursing home are overpaid. I think that community providers are underpaid. So, because certainly, we deal with a very specific population, but every nursing home provider has residents in their facilities with sex offense and criminal histories that may not have ever been convicted. So community providers deal with a lot of the same residents that we do, but we've actually had ours go through the court system.
Yeah, thank you.
Sure.
I was just wondering, what is your turnover rate? I mean, we're from a community nursing home, and it just always seems like, we have staff coming in and out, and you're obviously dealing with a difficult population, so I was just kind of curious.
I think compared to a community nursing home, our turnover rate would be pretty low. The orientation helps with that. And so we've had staff that have certainly come in and after being in orientation for 3 weeks have decided this isn't the population I want to work with. And so a lot of times we'll lose staff right within that first 3 to 6 weeks. After 3 weeks where they're in kind of classroom orientation, we also do at least another 2 weeks on the unit where they're just shadowing another employee. And during that time, we'll lose a couple as well because it's very hard to be comfortable with residents who don't respect your physical space. We have a lot of residents who can be very in your face, and a lot of residents that just make staff uncomfortable. We have social histories on all of our residents, and we encourage staff to read about that if they want to. Like I said, it's encouraged, but it's okay if they don't, because what we really want to do is meet the resident where they are today. And I think sometimes reading those histories of this resident who's now 70 years old and was a serial rapist when they were in their 30s can be quite scary. And so even despite the fact that in that time they maybe had a stroke or something else that limits their physical ability to do things, it can still be rather intimidating. But I can tell you that, our wages and benefits certainly get people in the door. And I think that they really do try to do as much as they can to remain at the facility because it really makes a difference in their personal lives. to be paid a actual living wage, and and be assured of certain things, like we won't go below minimums, we won't work short. There's no way. It's much too much of a risk. And there's a lot of security there as well. What I like to tell people, I remember when I was taking this job at the forensic nursing home, I remember talking to my mother, and she said, "Oh my goodness, Michelle, you're gonna work with those people?" And I thought about it, and I said, at least I know who those people are. I have some idea of their history. There's been lots of professional staff who have done risk assessments and everything else. And I told her, I said, "You know what, Mom, the person you need to be worried about is your neighbor, or the person in line behind you at the grocery store, who hasn't been through the legal system." Everybody that's through the legal system, there are a lot of people who have not been through the legal system that have committed some pretty significant offenses. So I don't want to make people scared of the person you're sitting next to or anything, but at least with our population, we know who they are, or at least have a good idea. There's probably some other things that they've done that we don't know about, but at least we have an awareness.
I just had a question about when you were showing the pictures of the facility. I noticed there were no art with glass or anything on the walls. So do you not allow any glass frames or anything then?
No glass. We have a contraband list of, it's probably about 6 pages. I mean, even spiral-bound notebooks. You can't have spiral-bound notebooks. Like I mentioned the catalogs before. There are many different things that can be used as weapons if a person wants to do that. So we have quite an extensive list. And another part of it is within our staffing, we have staff. It's important, in a community nursing home, we had our minimum staffing, and a lot of it was staff that were pretty much in resident rooms all the time providing cares. In this type of setting, it's also important to have staff that are just on the unit all the time, keeping an eye on things. We've had incidents where staff were involved in providing cares or in a resident room, and one resident has gone into a second resident's room and threatened that person. We've had, some fights between residents and things like that. So it's important to monitor the environment at all times, and that can't be done if everyone's in a resident room. That leaves both, staff and other residents quite vulnerable.
How do you deal with the regulatory aspects of being a nursing home, yet dealing with people that may get into an altercation or, those types of things?
Well, I found as a community provider, we had the same thing. We had some residents that would be involved in altercations, and we had a dementia-specific unit where that was not uncommon to have residents going into others' private rooms and things like that. One of the things that we did before opening the forensic nursing home was we sat down with the health department surveyors, the team that comes to survey us on an annual basis, and explained to them the type of residents that we were dealing with. We also shared with them all of our policies and procedures and talked about how we plan to operate the facility. And so it was good exposure to the surveyors before they actually came in to do a survey. We were all well informed going in. And certainly what we found is that the surveyors have been just astonished at the histories of the residents that we serve. And they have more questions for our staff of, how do you feel comfortable working in this environment, knowing that, this person did that. That's been more of their reaction. But certainly, in terms of resident rights and things like that, we typically adhere to their rights. It's just that we tweak our operation a little bit. Like one of the rights is that residents should receive their mail-in packages unopened. Well, we do give them their mail-in packages unopened, but they have to open it in front of us and, empty it out, and we check it that way. So we figure out how to do it to keep everyone safe. So in terms of I'm sorry.
I got a question. Did you have any law enforcement training before you took over that job or after you took over that job at all?
I have not had any law enforcement training. When I completed my bachelor's degree and was working on my master's degree, I went to school in St. Peter, Minnesota, where the facility is located. I actually worked at the Regional Treatment Center then for 3 years while I worked on my master's degree. So I had that exposure as a nursing assistant to the population that we were dealing with, and certainly as a part of my, I have a minor in corrections in terms of my degree, but I didn't actually have any law enforcement training. But the training that we provide our staff is somewhat law enforcement. You know, we expose our staff to that so they're aware of it.
Do you have armed guards there at all?
No,
Okay.
we don't have. We actually do not have armed guards on our campus. The personal safety technique training is really what we use in case we have to protect ourselves physically. But certainly, we try to de-escalate incidents before they even occur. Once they do occur, we've had training on how to deal with that, and that's how we've been able to handle it. There have been occasions on our campus where we've had to call in law enforcement, and once they come onto our campus, they do what they need to do. So sure, there have been residents that have been tased. We've had residents that have been cuffed and taken to the jail, and either they settle down and there's a decision whether to charge them with something or not. But we have a very strong relationship with law enforcement in our community. In terms of security, our building is locked at all times. One of the things that we are not able to do is, I talked about, we have 3 different wings, and we don't separate people on those wings based upon what their diagnosis or history or anything is. There was a consideration when the plans were done for the building initially that there would be, one of the units would be locked off to have residents with dementia. You know, a lot of nursing homes do that where you have a secured unit for residents with dementia. We could not do that because the building itself was locked. So when you lock a particular area within the building that's already locked, it's called subcompartmentalization, and that really goes against your fire codes because they'd be double locked with trying to exit in case there were any issues. So that's why we don't have a dementia-specific unit where residents are locked in that particular area. We have security cameras throughout the building, and door operations are controlled at the nurse's station and the receptionist desk. We also have a master control center on campus that monitors all our campus and fire alarm systems and everything else. They also keep an eye on the nursing home. I mentioned the Sally port on the unit. For visitors, all visitors need prior approval before coming to our building. If it's an inmate from Department of Corrections, I contact Department of Corrections and provide them with the visitor's complete name and date of birth, and they run them through a database to make sure they're approved to visit. If not, they don't visit. We do the same thing with residents from our sex offender program. So when a visitor actually comes to our campus, we already have that prior approval. Once they arrive, they have to leave everything in a locker. Nothing is brought into the visit room. We have metal detectors that we scan the visitors with, and then our staff sit the entire visit. And that's not necessarily for to be aware of the conversation that they're having, but we have to be concerned with some of the physical contact that may occur. Our residents are not allowed outside of our building unless staff are with them. And some of our residents, we have 2 staff escort them. With some, it may be only 1. With our sex offenders in particular, we have staff from the Minnesota Sex Offender Program that come and take them out of our building. And when they are taken out of the building, they are in shackles, cuffs and shackles typically. And so, like if we have resident in the, if it's a resident with the sex offense history and they're in a hospital, the Minnesota Sex Offender Program staff will stay with them at the hospital, and they'll typically have them handcuffed to the bed. dependent upon the resident's security status, some are only allowed outside of the building for medical or legal appointments, and others, typically more of our residents that are committed mentally ill and dangerous, we are able to take them out for some leisure activities with staff present. Our staff wear radios. Every staff person has a radio. The radio is used to contact other staff if you need any type of assistance. As I mentioned, we're part of a campus, so if we run into an incident at the nursing home that the nursing home staff can't handle and we need some backup, we're able to call to the rest of the staff on campus. And the building nearest to us, which is the Minnesota Security Hospital, their staff respond and come and assist us. We use an incident command system throughout the campus, and that's how we alert staff that assistance is needed. And we have emergency response teams within our building. So if I was a nursing assistant at the nursing home and I went into work today, I would learn if I'm part of Team A or Team B. And that's so on the campus, if there's an emergency situation that's occurring, when we go into the ICS system, we'll ask for a response from Team A, and people from that particular team will come so that not all of your resources are leaving your building. It can't be just a general call and then anyone who's available runs out. You really need to plan for staff to also remain within your program. We do room searches. We typically do those twice a year. When residents come into our building, we go through all of their belongings, again, checking for contraband. And then twice a year, we go through the entire building again and checking for contraband. Notification requirements. Because we're part of the Regional Treatment Center campus and we have the Minnesota Sex Offender Program on campus, the St. Peter community is aware that we have sex offenders within our program. So when we admit a resident, it's not an individual notification like a community nursing home would have to make. It's just known throughout the community that we have residents with sex offense histories. So that kind of makes it easy for us. It's actually, and I live in St. Peter, it's actually part of the welcome packet that you get as a person coming into St. Peter. It'll talk about what the treatment center is and who we have there so that residents are aware. And within a nursing home, we don't have any seclusion and we don't do any type of mechanical restraint. When we have a resident that is not in behavioral control and they need to be secluded, we move them to the security hospital. Again, seclusion rooms is not something that would be approved under nursing home licensure. So some of the challenges that we've been faced with since we opened is our resident mix. We have certainly the difference with the legal status, having some residents that have more of a mental health diagnosis and other residents with a criminal or sexual history, and then the physical abilities. We have some residents that are diagnosed with dementia but are physically independent at this time. We can put toothpaste on their toothbrush and hand it to them and they'll get to brush their, they can physically do that. And then we have some residents that are completely dependent. So again, when you have that mix of residents, it's important to have staff that are just paying attention at all times to what's going on, so that residents don't become victims of other residents. The roommate situation, as I mentioned before, that's a tough one for us. Had the money been there, we would have done all private rooms in the facility. It's really the safest way to go. We have very few community placements, and by placements I mean nursing homes in particular, that are willing to accept residents from our facility or residents that have that criminal or sexual background. And a big issue for Minnesota is there are a lot of community-based sex offenders that we're not able to find placement for. For a resident to come to our forensic nursing home with a sex offense history, they're coming through our Minnesota Sex Offender Program. And the way that works is a resident will be, a person will be convicted of a crime. They'll serve their prison sentence, and prior to being released from prison, they go through a leveling where the risk assessment and other things are considered. And they go to a review board that actually gives them a level in Minnesota. The levels are 1, 2, and 3. A level 1 and 2, or a level 1 is least likely to reoffend. Level 2 is kind of a medium offender risk. And a level 3 is most likely to reoffend. So if they're most likely to reoffend, they'll typically go to the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. And that is, there's no time limits on being in the Minnesota Sex Offender Program. And Minnesota has run into several lawsuits recently related to that because no one has graduated from the program yet. And it keeps growing and growing and growing. And so I think there'll be some changes coming forward with that. But in order to get to the forensic nursing home, they come through the sex offender program.
On the individuals that aren't at the high risk, are your nursing facilities willing to take those types of individuals? Or is there a placement issue with even those individuals?
There's placement issues with even residents that aren't considered high risk. And so I get a lot of phone calls from local hospitals that have someone that's on the sex offender registry, and they can't get a community nursing home to take them. And then they ask me if we can take them, and we can't because they're not committed to the state. So it really puts those providers in a bind, and we've actually had residents that have remained in the hospital for months and months beyond when they needed to be released because they couldn't find placement for them. And that's something that we in Minnesota know we have to address. Some of the other challenges we have for staff attitude, some of our residents feel that our residents should be punished. And even, any little thing, there should be consequences related to it. And as the speaker spoke to this morning, just because someone says you're ugly or says you're fat or something like that, you can't or you shouldn't necessarily try to punish them for that. They shouldn't lose the privilege of buying a pop that day or anything else. And that's something that, for certain staff, they do have an issue with that. They feel like we should be more corrections-based. Staff boundaries with residents. We have had some incidents on our campus, especially with our sex offenders. Sex offenders can be very manipulative. And a lot of times staff don't even realize when they're being manipulated. And so, we've had staff trying to sneak things in for residents and things like that. And it's very important that you don't develop a personal relationship with the resident where they see you as a friend or a confidant or any other thing beyond a caregiver. It's a difficult population to serve. We found they have some different behaviors that make people uncomfortable. And so what we do with our staff is just make sure they're aware of that right off the bat. But then there's always something new that comes in that, we hadn't even thought about. Public perception is an issue as well, and media coverage. Certainly for us, as I mentioned, because we're part of the state system, we have very high wages and benefits for our staff, and we've been told before that we have stolen all the good staff in the area. And, why would they work at Sunnyvale Nursing Home for $8 an hour when they can work at our facility for $15? Well, remember, we're working with a very distinct population. And a lot of people won't decide to come to work with us just because of that population. And staff injuries, that's typical for nursing home, but for us, those injuries, it may be caused by not just the lifting and the physical part of the job, but we do have some residents that are assaultive. Oops, I guess that was it. I'm surprised. So are there any other questions for me? I think there was just a couple of things I wanted to mention. I didn't share everything in this presentation, of course, but we have some very specific admission criteria. And I think if you're considering opening a forensic nursing home, it's important to define your admission criteria and stick to it. You don't want your facility viewed as a dumping ground for people who, won't go through treatment. You need to be very specific and try to stick to your criteria. Otherwise, you'll end up with a mix of residents that you may not be able to handle. And another thing, a lot of times sexual behaviors don't go away, or sexual interests. So even with a resident with dementia, they can still be very sexual. So I think, in a community nursing home, we didn't typically walk into a resident's room and find them masturbating or attempting to kiss staff or becoming sexually aroused while receiving personal cares. That does happen with this population. And so that's just something to be aware of. We have a very specific dress code. In orientation, we tell staff that our staff wear scrubs to begin with, but if, for our staff, if they look at themselves in the mirror and they think, oh boy, I look good today, then you need to change. You don't want to draw any unnecessary attention to yourself. Don't try to stand out. Blend in as well as you can. Right now, the state is looking at doing a request for proposals for a community nursing home provider that will open a somewhat forensic facility in the community. And in order to do that, we know that we have to offer an enhanced rate. As I mentioned, our daily rate for residents is between $500 and $600 a day. For the nursing homes, community nursing homes in Minnesota, those rates are somewhere between $100 and $150. There's a big gap. And so certainly we realize that if the expectation is that all resident with forensic histories don't end up in our forensic nursing home, we're going to have to provide some incentive to those community providers. So, were there any other questions for me? I'm sorry, I didn't hear you.
Totally male census?
The question was if our census is totally males, and it is not. We have both male and female residents. One of the stipulations that we have for our female residents coming in is we have one wing in the nursing home that is more visible from the nurse's station. Our female residents are on that particular wing. And then we also have a security system on those resident doors that have a female resident, so that we know when staff are going in and out of those rooms. Not just staff, but anyone. It's got like a laser beam, and so we can know right away if someone has entered that room or exited the room. And then, of course, all the security cameras monitor all resident doors and things like that. Any other questions for me? Okay. Well, thank you very much. Oops, someone's pointing. The question was what state government branch we're affiliated with, and we're actually part of the Department of Health and Human Services. Okay, any other questions? Okay, well, thank you very much. Again, all of my contact information is there in the presentation, and you can give me a call or shoot me an email if I can help with anything. It's been lots of lessons learned, and you don't have to reinvent the wheel. So, thank you.
Thank you.